Hi, have you heard of the word or the term radical reliance in Christian Science? Do you think you know what it means? I know that I used to. I used to think I knew what it meant until I really understood what it meant. Hi, my name is Julie. I was born into the Christian Science church and religion, and after 40 years I went my own way, and I feel that brought me back to the understanding of Mary Baker's original revelation that we're spiritual beings and that matter is our reflection or our thoughts. And if we make matter out to be something, then that's the problem of a false identity, because we believe we're an identity in body instead of a spiritual being or the divine mind or divine soul. And her revelation was simple, but it was, in 1866, it was, it was met with a lot of questioning and a lot of misunderstandings. And over the years, after Mrs. Eddy passed away in 1910, we've kind of gone back to that misunderstanding and mistranslations and all that. That's what the human mind does. The mind that thinks it's a matter body, the mind that thinks it's a human, that's what it does. It gets some truth and it perverts it over time, and then the truth has to come back. Our true mind, the divine mind, our true self, is constantly speaking the truth to us through our mind, through our understanding. And God, that's God. The God is love, and God is the truth of our being, and we're continually hearing good thoughts, truth, loving thoughts, thoughts that help us wake out of the dream of life and matter. And this in Science and Health on page 167, there is a statement, only on line 30, only through radical reliance on truth, capital T, meaning divine truth, can scientific healing power be realized. And it's interesting. She goes on to say, substituting good words for a good life, fair seeming for straightforward character, is a poor shift for the weak and worldly who think the standard of Christian Science too high for them. She kind of goes into some, an explanation of hypocrisy, and that hypocrisy is not going to get us where we want to be, where we say one thing and we do another. Like a friend of mine who has been ascending in thought for a while, we recently had a conversation, and there was a financial concern for him, a significant financial concern that he could not surrender to divine mind, that he couldn't let go of. He was caught in a hypnotic state of mind where it was just overpowering his whole being, this fear of this financial situation. And as we all try to do, we try to talk a little truth, it's a close friend of mine and a family member, in fact. And, to say, we live in a world of spirit, and in spirit there is no lack. Everything we need is always there. So if the problem is, if it's something that, if there's something needed to solve the problem, it will occur, it will appear, as long as you can let go of the mesmerism that's keeping you from seeing, And as like all of us, he's like, that's not helping me. And the talking cures don't help. The talking cures I found don't help. And so I said, well, you tell me all the time that the material world isn't real, that this is the matrix, that it's an illusion. I said, so are you a hypocrite? You know, and I said, you're going to believe the illusion in this instance, but not in other instances. And that, he was like, oh yeah. I said, it's either all real or all a lie, but we don't get to pick and choose. And to me, I think that's what radical reliance is. Radical reliance is something that we are growing in our awareness of what's real and what isn't. And it's only through radical reliance on truth, on the truth. The truth is that we are spiritual beings and everything in our world is spirit. And if we think it's matter and we think there's, that there's limitation, because matter is limited. Are limited resources. There's a limited intelligence, limited love, limited happiness, limited lifespan, limited health. Everything is limited in matter, but in spirit, nothing is limited. And as we unwind from the dream, we start to experience this unlimited sense of being, and we start surrendering our concepts of limitation. And this occurs, over time, step by step. Will those who trust him find? God is a very present help in trouble. I'll put the quote where that quote is from, but we're learning to, in this unwinding, when we allow the divine mind to unwind us from our belief that we're the human personality, we let our true self unwind us from the belief that we're the false self. It's a really yeah, that's how the deal is. And further up on this, she says, we cannot serve two masters nor perceive divine science with the material senses. Drugs and hygiene cannot successfully usurp the place and power of the divine source of all health and perfection. So she, we talk a lot about, in Christian Science, this belief is we don't go to doctors and we don't take medicine. And it was like everything else, it was started with a base of truth. Not that we don't go, it was the base of truth is that within the illusion, drugs, doctors, prescriptions, all that stuff, going to doctors, within the illusion, it's all part of the illusion. Everything that we experience is part of the illusion. Eating, drinking, eating to make us, healthy or not healthy, drinking, same deal, sleeping, sex, you name it in the material world, it's all part of the illusion, and it's all part of kind of this limited sense of life. As a spiritual being, we're not limited, but for an instant, we believed we were. And that's this unfolding going on, is unfolding to us the truth of who we really are. And so, yeah, drugs and hygiene, I think hygiene is, it was a big term back in Mrs. Eddy's day. I think, it's still applicable today. Drugs and hygiene cannot successfully usurp the place and power of the divine source of all health and perfection. Yeah, they can't. When you're going to a doctor or you're taking medication, over-the-counter prescription, whatever, it's all using the power of thought, the power of mortal thought, to patch things up and to heal, to patch things up. And it doesn't make us, it doesn't, I think the point is to wake us up from the dream. You know, the healing of sin. Sin is the belief. That's the purpose of Christian Science. And sin, it's a terrible word, but it really just means the belief of that we're the corporeal personality, and it's a belief, and it's all happening in as a belief system. And so we're supposed to wake up. So yeah, drugs, hygiene, all that stuff, it won't wake us up from the dream. So it's like anything else. It's anything else in the dream. Nothing in the dream is going to wake us up. It's all just things that we think we need in the dream. Food is something we think we need, and it is in the dream something we need. You know, spiritual masters, spiritual beings, people who have come into a greater understanding of their spiritual nature, you often hear that they eat less and less and less. They need less of everything, of material, and they, you know, don't get ill. They don't get sick to the degree that the rest of us do, and their environment starts to be more harmonious and productive, whatever that is. So yeah, that we will at some point no longer need any of these things. And I think Mrs. Eddy was up against a really strong thought system, you know, that back then Christianity was only for healing of sin, and sin meaning, you know, original sin and all the different, you know, beliefs about what sin is to each different Christian group. Breaking the 10 Commandments. But Christianity at the time had forgotten that Jesus said, heal the sick, cleanse lepers, cast out devils. You know, freely ye have received, freely give. So it was, he healed, and his purpose was to show us how to heal. It wasn't like, oh, I'm this great, I'm God come to the planet Earth to, you know. No, everything he did was as a way shower to teach us the way out. And so he healed to show that it's, you know, as a spiritual being, you're not ill, and he could prove that by what we call healing. He could prove that he knew you were a spiritual being, and he could show it to others that you were a spiritual being. And Mrs. Eddy could heal to that same degree. Anyone who rises to that level of understanding of reality can heal to that same degree, because it's not healing to them. It's just like an awareness of the truth, and it's the truth to them. I mean, they're not confused. But when other people are in their presence, their awareness of that truth, their clarity of mind, of thought, clears up the errors in the people around them. So the people around them start to see all these errors disappearing, errors manifesting as illness, or, you know, as paralysis, or all the different things that Jesus healed. There were just errors in their thought, misunderstandings of reality that were manifesting as illness, physical illness. And that's all physical illness is. It's errors in thought manifesting in this material illusion as certain illnesses. And that's why the healing of the true Christian Science healing is self-examination. You're allowing errors in your thought to surface. They're not your errors. You're not a sinner. You didn't do anything bad. Excuse me. They're errors. There are errors in your thought that we don't know what they are. That's why it's so, you know, when someone like Jesus or Mrs. Eddy would come into their presence and we could see the errors clearly, we could be like, oh yeah, I don't believe that. That's not, but it was always, there lodged in thought somewhere. And so, yeah, if you really understand what Christian Science is, that, we're being taught we're spiritual beings, and we just believe we're material beings, and we got to allow ourselves to be, unwound from it. Then yeah, you do understand drugs and hygiene can't take the place of this truth, because nothing in the material universe can. Resorting to anything in the material years. So that's what, the two masters, that we cannot serve two masters, which is our belief in the unreality, our belief in the reality of an existence separate from God, or an existence as a matter body, and our understanding of the truth of reality. We can't serve both. And right now we're serving both. And her goal was to bring us out of it. And one of the goals is she had to tell the truth, and the truth is remedies, material remedies, don't wake you up from the dream. They just patch things up. And that truth, she says again, an error in the premise must appear in the conclusion. To have one God and avail yourself of the power of spirit, you must love God supremely. That means you must love spirit supremely, or you must start, recognize the fact that you're spirit, not matter, more and more and more and more and more. In the next paragraph, the flesh lusteth against the spirit. The flesh and spirit can no more unite in action than good can coincide with evil. It is not wise to take a halting and halfway position, or to expect to work equally with spirit and matter, truth and error. There is but one way, namely God and his idea, which leads to a spiritual being. The scientific government of the body must be attained through the divine mind. It is impossible to gain control over the body in any other way. On this point, timid conservatism is absolutely inadmissible. Only through radical reliance on truth can scientific healing power be realized. Now, these people were coming from a world where everybody, people were dying of tuberculosis every day. If you got it, you knew you were going to die. There was no cure. There was no way back. All kinds of stuff back then. There was no cure, no way back. People, there were doctors, but they had, they didn't have medication that was, they had medication. They had all kinds of different tonics and stuff like that. And, the people that she was introducing the Christians, she was saying, Christianity, Jesus said heal the sick too, not just heal the sinner. And they were like, what? And they were thinking all they had to rely on was medicine and doctors, and those didn't work most of the time. And, and they didn't know they could rely on God to be healed. And this was a huge, huge shift for them. And in this shift, she had to keep, working and correcting their thought. Like, if a practitioner was like, okay, I'll take the case, and then here's this tonic I'd like you to take also. That's like working halfway and halting, to take a halting and halfway position, or to expect to work equally with spirit and matter. If the practitioner wasn't understanding what I just explained back then, they might try and, do both. This will help with this, and my treatment will help with this. Or in the beginning, they would lay hands. They would, and they would lay hands on the patient. So the patient would think that the hands were healing them. or the touch was healing them, you know. And it's always happening in mind. We are all one divine mind, and the belief that we're matter is the belief we're all one moral mind, one. And so that's why healing, absent healing and absent treatment, that's why it all works, because we're the same mind. But she was like, okay, no, we're trying to ascend the scale, and you're confusing people by saying, a little bit of matter, a little bit of spirit, and and that'll do you. A little bit of treatment. I'll give you my treatment, and you take the tonic. That to me is like, halfway success. But it's all about beliefs. And those of us who are born into the religion, we don't think that going to a doctor, taking medicine cures anything. We understand that there is something more to us. How much of that we understand, that's the thing. But we don't have to be shooken out of or shifted out of this like total reliance on material remedies for health. I mean, that's scary for them at the time. That's all they knew to rely on. And this was a big shift for them. We know that it's all in thought. And so it's the thought that has the power. And if the thought thinks something that isn't true, then it's illusion and it's illusory. And it's just occurring through mortal mind. But so we don't have to come out of that belief system. We have other fish to fry. We, people who are generationally been in the religion and church, we have to come out. We have this tremendous fear. At least I know I did, and my family does, and pretty much everyone that I've talked to in the church and the religion after being a practitioner for several years, people have a tremendous fear and hatred of the medical profession and of the medical world. And it's constantly being talked, we talk about it and how bad it is, and that we constantly make a mountain out of a molehill. I think you just like with anything, you go too far one way, which is you don't know that you are a spiritual being, and that you don't have to rely on medicine to heal. And on the other side, not knowing you're a spiritual being, but just knowing you can't rely on medicine to heal. Like you're not allowed to, because it would delay your progress. But in the middle is an understanding of, okay, I'm a spiritual being. I'm waking up from my belief of being a mortal personality. And I know, I've read the book and I understand this is the Adam dream. And to rely on, the divine mind, my higher self, God, for everything, that's the goal, because that's what unwinds me from the dream, but while I'm, in this process of being unwound, I may need help along the way. Especially if you've gone, think about, like my dad, who went 80 years without doing any sort of self-examination, any sort of willingness to listen to what thoughts were governing him. Was it hate? Was it fear? Was it anxiety? Was it worry? Was it anger? Was it prejudice? Was it resentment? Those were all there for him, and really strongly. But he spent his whole life treating disease, and not going to doctors. And, my stomach is an idea of God, and therefore it cannot be bloated because God's not bloated. He had all these treatments that he had come up with, that he thought worked, that he thought would work. I mean, they didn't work. They never worked. So if you've been going along a long time without this understanding that, no, it's about changing the standpoint of your life from a personality to a divine being, and you're giving up the personality and what the personality believes. You're surrendering it and the personality and all its beliefs, by letting your true self expose those beliefs one by one by one by one. If you've gone a whole lifetime without doing that, more and more as you've gone on not doing it, not living Christian Science, but just saying the words and not going to doctors, like you've been living in a state of a split mind already. You've been living in a halfway point. You're believing in the material universe, but not getting some help within the universe because you have been told you're a spiritual being and you believe you're a spiritual being, but you don't know you're a spiritual being yet. You will at some point. You'll understand that you are now a spiritual being, but you're not there yet. And there's no reason to martyr yourself because because you haven't got there yet. What would be the point of suffering or cutting your life short? What would be the point? And a lot of people say that radical reliance means, no matter what, you don't ever give in to going to a doctor or taking medicine. That it's almost, you could say, a lot of Christian Scientists believe radical reliance is your willingness to martyr yourself. Even if you don't have a healing, because there's some value in that. There's some value in the phrase radical reliance and the standpoint of radical reliance itself. Like in and of itself, has value. Even though you don't know what it means, even though you're not at all aware or understand true Christian Science, that you have not read the book very thoroughly. And if you have, you did it through a lens of what you were taught as a child, what your friends and family have taught you, and you're just looking for, when you're reading it, treatments and everything about sin. You're just skipping over because you're not a sinner, so you don't need to know that stuff. It's just, and that's like most of the book. In retrospection and introspection, sin as a claim is more dangerous than sickness, more subtle, more difficult to heal. The claim of life as a material personality is more dangerous than the sickness within the dream. More subtle and more difficult to heal. Yes, I guarantee it. But that's where Christian Science is at. That's what this is. Eddy's like, the emphatic purpose of Christian Science is the healing of sin. I mean, she put it in her book. Is healing the sick the whole of science? In Rudimentary Divine Science, page 2, healing physical sickness is the smallest part of Christian Science. It's only the bugle call of thought and action in the higher range of infinite goodness. The emphatic purpose of Christian Science is the healing of sin. The whole claim and all the errors that go along with that claim. And they are subtle. They are so subtle. Opinions about what is morally appropriate. Those can be very subtle claims of sin that, as you have accepted those claims, you're saying this thing, this way of acting, this way of being is morally appropriate, and that one is not. And whether you're self-righteous or not about it, you're accepting something within the material dream is better than something else in the material dream. And you've just made it real. You've made it real. And during the unwinding, if you're open and you're willing and you're humble, that one might pop up one day. And you're like, oh yeah, I was really on this moral, like just even like if it was a mild moral, where I thought certain my idea of morality was based on, what I see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, what's going on with the human personalities. And that it is so subtle and more difficult to heal because it requires a willingness and a humility that Christian Science is all about, We're all about healing sin. That's our purpose. The emphatic purpose of Christian Science is the healing of sin. We're all about the scientific statement of being, which is the definition of matter. That matter isn't a reality in and of itself. It is the thoughts, our thoughts seen dancing around. And if we claim that body as our personality, as our being, then that's the problem. The scientific statement of me. It's pretty clear when you get down to it, and then you can understand radical reliance in those terms. If the radical reliance is, turning to the divine mind and saying, yeah, okay, I want out of this, lead me, and I'm going to stop listening to mortal mind. I'm going to stop listening to the human personality. I'm going to surrender that. In retrospection and introspection on page 67, she says, silencing self, alias rising above the corporeal personality, is what reforms the sinner and destroys sin. So, for those of us who've just been in it for so long, this radical reliance, we have to start seeing that differently. It's a radical reliance on the divine mind, and even in here, in in the statement, it's a radical reliance on truth. On truth, the truth of who we are, what the divine mind is continually speaking to us, the truth about who we are. And we have to stop listening to the people who are using that to murder us. They're using it, I think they're, being used by mortal mind to murder Christian Scientists. So we have less Christian Scientists, and it just goes away. I think that if I was mortal mind and I didn't want to be seen as nothing, I didn't want to be exposed for the error that I am, that's what I would do. I would use radical reliance against the Christian Scientists instead of for them. I would say it meant, what it didn't. I would confuse the already confused Christian Scientists if I really wanted the, mortal mind is always working against us. This belief of life, truth, intelligence, and substance in matter, it seems to be a real mind. It isn't, but it is acting as one. And it seems to have, a desire to live well, to exist in perpetuity without being relinquished to the divine mind. In Course in Miracles, David Hoffmeister says, the ego wants you dead. And that's what mortal mind is. It's the human ego. And yeah, it wants you dead. And dead meaning living in a material existence in the dream state for eternity. That's what it wants. Because that's all it knows. And it only knows to protect what it has and what it thinks is real. So don't let mortal mind govern your understanding of Christian Science. Don't stop listening to others. Stop, even me, read the book yourself. Go back to Mrs. Eddy's first version of Science and Health, or the second/third, or whatever. If you can't read it, like I couldn't read it without just I was still stuck in the Christian Science. Like I was looking for, treatments to heal. If you can't read it differently from a different standpoint, read her original ones. They're totally different wording. They're different everything, and she's saying the same thing, but in a whole different, like lots of different ways, and it's a lot more helpful for me. You can't go wrong with reading her writings and prose works, and her original class notes, and I like going back to, most of her writings from the periodicals, most or all are in prose works, but then in prose works there's a lot of other books, and once you can read them without this like preconception of Christian Science, this stuff starts to make a lot more sense, and you start to be able to put it together better. And when someone is telling you something that is this restriction, and you start to get the, oh, I see what their belief system is, and I understand that, but that's not my belief system anymore. I'm not going down that path, So I hope that helps.